The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the Nova Society are those of our guests and panel members and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of any institution any member of the Nova Society is associated with. The material information presented on the Nova Society is for general information purposes only. Reproduction or dissemination for the purpose other than education is prohibited without express written consent of the Nova Society. I'd like to welcome everyone back to the Nova Society. And again, this week, as most of the people are on vacation or in graduation ceremonies, we will be looking back at a conversation we had regarding the peace deal that was presented, and we'll be answering an email from a listener in Israel who is asking if the United States is actually acting like a world superpower or if we are being the great appeasers. So we will answer that question. To remind everybody, the Nova Society, again, will be on vacation until May 13th, where we will return to our normal schedule, and we hope that you will join us then. So, let's listen in. All right, so our last email. And unfortunately, we don't have Priscilla here to sing the Blues Clues mailbag song. Scott missed that. It's the episode, I think it was put out today, Priscilla singing the Blues Clues mailbag song. As an expat, I believe it's time to stop calling America the land of the free and the brave. Let's call you guys what you really are, the land of appeasement. The hostage deal forced upon Israel by Big Brother America is another example of failed American diplomacy trying to find the easy way out for them at the expense of Israel's security. Isn't it time your country stands up and tries to act like the leader of the free world? Ephraim from Israel. I know this is a topic near and dear to your heart, Scott. What do you think?
Well, a lot of things can be true all at once, and I certainly empathize with Ephraim when it comes to here. Let me try it this way. I think Kamala Harris was wrong the other day when she put out some kind of announcement that this is going too far and that Israel needs to accept the ceasefire. Ceasefires only work if both sides are ceasefiring, and there's no indication that I could see that Hamas has any intention of dealing in good faith, releasing hostages, even if they get 800 prisoners per every hostage that they release. They're, this is an inequitable deal that we are pushing in order to stop the violence, and if it is accompanied by the best minds in U.S. defense of coming up with a different way to destroy Hamas, okay, I think Israel should listen to that. But it does seem to me that the people who are putting the babies on the roof of buildings that are about to be bombed are the ones who are guilty here. And that this raid from October 7th was, to say the least, poorly thought out, and to say the worst, I think, deliberately self-destructive on the part of what is, in fact, a death cult that celebrates death more than it celebrates life. And that the responsibility falls squarely on Hamas here. And if the poor people of Gaza find themselves unable to get out of the way, it's more than likely because the guns of Hamas are trained on them and telling them, you take one step in that direction and we'll blow your brains out. And they are in a horrible place that way too many of them seem to still support. So I hope, Ephraim, that's a way of answering your question. We are not appeasers. We are trying to walk a line in between massive whole-scale slaughter of innocent people whose own leadership don't care about them, as we have seen before in Stalinist Russia, in Maoist China, in Nazi Germany, where the individuals don't matter and only the cause itself matters. And we all need to keep in mind that a peaceful solution to this problem must be found on both sides, not just on the part of the Israelis.
Brooklyn?
I was thinking, remembering that a friend of mine with whom I went to elementary and secondary school, my friend's neighbors went to Israel on kibbutz and has not been seen since. This was back in October. The family was there, and they've vanished. So presumably they've been taken hostage as well, but they're missing. As far as I know, they've not been heard from or found. I absolutely deplore violence, and I want it to stop, which is, of course, isn't going to do anything for anybody. I mean, Hamas had to have known that the response from Israel was going to be overwhelming, disproportionate to what Hamas did initially, and that it was not going to stop, and that the Palestinian people were going to pay very dearly for what Hamas did in October, and yet Hamas did it anyway. And the despair in Gaza, it's just overwhelming. The fact that there is no way to extract the civilians is, and as Scott said, I mean, there needs to be a ceasefire on both sides. And there was a security resolution that both China and Russia vetoed, that Biden put forth. That was, of course, vetoed. And so that was the end of that. So as far as appeasement goes, I mean, appeasement, I think of what's his name, Neville Chamberlain and Hitler, and that type of appeasement, signing a treaty that then, of course, doesn't mean anything because the individual signing it has no intention of keeping it. Netanyahu and Biden have known each other for a long, long time. And I know that people are really, including, I think, in Israel, are becoming very irritated with how Netanyahu's handling this situation, and are themselves calling for a ceasefire. I don't know if this is going to stop anytime soon. I don't know what the United States is supposed to do. Go into Israel with troops and establish a demilitarized zone, a DMZ, between Israel and the Gaza Strip, whether either side wants it or not, insert itself in the middle. And I don't know if anybody is going to go for that, including the United States military. I mean, I'm not really sure what it is that we can do.
Well, look, could I just jump back in a second?
Please do.
I think what some people are trying to suggest in this country is that Biden needs to withdraw support for Israel and no longer give them aid, no longer give them military advice, no longer give them material to fight with. I disagree with that, but that's what some people want. The idea that we would march troops in there and post them as a barrier between them reminds me of Lebanon in 1982. I don't think we ever want to see anything like that again. And with the Marine barracks being blown to pieces and 234 Marines killed, we don't want to see anything like that. And Biden would be well advised, and I'm sure he knows this, to stay away from that situation. As far as the word appeasement, I don't believe applies here in any way. They're trying to find the most peaceful solution that they can, given the circumstances, which are not promising. As I started to say earlier with Kamala Harris, no U.S. leader should presume that they can tell the Israelis how to defend themselves. I don't think that that's possible. they could suggest tactics and they can suggest a different approach. That's fine, but we have to understand that Israeli is in charge of its own security, and they're going to do what they have to do to be secure. Israelis were aggrieved with Bibi Netanyahu long before this attack happened, when his government formed and he began to try to dismantle the powers of their Supreme Court to allow him and his government to make laws without checks or balances on it, was anti-democratic maneuver that the Israelis had been going out and protesting against for a year before this attack happened. As I've said on this podcast 1,000 times, Bibi must go. I don't think there's any doubt about that. He has failed at the most fundamental job he had of protecting the Israeli people. And so if anybody suggests that the government hold a no confidence vote and that they hold elections to find new leadership, all for it. That has to happen at some point or another. This is no longer a viable government and hasn't been, I think, from the very beginning, long before this attack happened. But as far as the military is concerned, the ultimate responsibility is now in the hands of the IDF. They've proven themselves very capable. I think it's disgusting to expect Israeli mothers to voluntarily mourn for the deaths of their own children to protect the children of their sworn enemy in this particular case. And in that, I mean all of Gaza, not just Hamas, but the people who are supporting them. I agree that they're in a horrible place. They're not being allowed to move. Hamas has been, since almost the day it formed, a criminal organization that has stolen from its own people to pursue their own suicidal agenda and homicidal agenda. That makes this a very complicated situation for sure. But we can advise, we can suggest, we can ultimately not provide security for Israel, and we have to stand back and let Israel do that for themselves, as ugly as it might be.
Correct. And I think that's the approach I'll take to answering this. The first thing to remember is now, and I'm going to push back on the idea that this was forced upon Israel by the United States. Israel is a sovereign nation. They could have said no. Very easily, they could have said no. And I know that this probably comes from the remembrance of 1,000 hostages for one person. And those 1,000 hostages, there were some really bad people that were put out there and were involved in what happened back in October. I get that. I understand that totally. But Israel is a sovereign nation. They have the ability to say no. The other thing is that isn't it time your country stands up and tries to act like the leader of the free world? What exactly does that look like to you? To bring our military might in, totally wipe out Gaza and be over and done with? Is that the leader of the free world you want? Somebody that uses might to make right? And what happens the next time? What happens if Israel is in the wrong? Are you going to be okay with might making right then too? I think the United States is acting in the best capacity it can. It is not directly involved. However, Israel is an ally and has had strong support from the United States for years. But the fact is that you're still a sovereign nation. There is only so much an outside actor can and should do to be a responsible world power. And world powers does not always mean that you bring to bear the military might that you have. That is not what it means. If that was the case, we would be in Ukraine right now. Because fact of the matter being, the Israeli military could end Hamas tomorrow if they wanted to. Ukrainians with the Russians, not so much. So if we were to act in that kind of vein, what maybe you're calling a leader of the free world, we would be in Ukraine right now, troops boots on the ground, using every bit of military capacity that we have to beat back the Russians. And we would beat back the Russians, plain and simple. I mean, it just seeing how this has progressed just against the Ukrainians, and that's not saying anything derogatory about the Ukrainians, but compared to the United States military, the Ukrainians are a minor power. So again, to be a world leader, to be the last true remaining superpower, which many consider the United States to be, there are responsibilities that come with that not everybody gets the assistance that they want. As Scott said, we can give advice, we can give tactics, we can give suggestions, but that's all there is that we can do as a responsible leader of the world. The hostage deal may not be what you like. It's never going to be what everybody likes. But the fact is that as of right now, it's the best that could be come up with. And I wouldn't even say that the United States was the one that actually came up with it. We don't know that. We're not sure that this is a United States plan. This may be a plan devised by a whole bunch of different nations with interests into it that went to Israel and say, hey, here's the idea. Here's the plan. Let's consider doing this. But Israel always has the option to say no. And even though when this first started, and Scott and I talked about this, we were surprised how quickly public opinion in the world turned against Israel. We figured 2 weeks, and it was like 2 days. It was like 2 days, and it turned. Why that is there's a lot of different factors to that could contribute to that. That is something that historians will look at. I mean, after the conflict is over, they will go back and they will look at it and say, why did it only take 2 days? And there's a lot of speculation, but again, it right now, that's not really the important part. The important part is getting the hostages back, making sure Israel's secure, and making sure that Hamas, who I agree with Scott, is a death cult, especially if it's the death of their own people, but not them in particular. That's a very difficult group to have to deal with, that are bound and determined to use citizens as shields for their own purposes. So it is complex. It's a complex kind of problem that they're dealing with. But I think that the expectations of the leader of the free world, of people that are involved in this, I think you're expecting a little too much. And I think you're also really discounting how much input and how much control over this situation Israel really has. And I totally agree with Scott in the fact that Bibi Netanyahu has failed. He needs to go. Maybe it's time to look more internally than it is to look across the great pond. And that would be my comment to that. And I hope we have answered your question from Israel. And everybody here, our thoughts are with you because we know the difficult situation that Israel is in. And yeah, maybe it is time that Israel, to go your own path. You're not going to lose support in the United States as far as, the things that we've always given you. You will still get, I would assume you're still going to get those kind of things. But I think it's time that Israel mans up and understands, hey, you're a sovereign nation and you're not a vassal state of the United States. And we have no expectations of you being so. So hopefully that answered the question of that. So that was it for the mailbag for this week. Hopefully we answered all the questions. Some maybe we did better than others. Who knows? That's kind of the way we go. But now we all know that Scott is more than willing to sit on his couch until he's 80 years old and continue to do exactly what he's doing. And as long as Mud's around to take a nap on him, he's fine. So, So that's good. Guys, always good to talk to you. Priscilla will be back. She is in Chicago at a conference, and she will be back next week. So you guys take care.
You too.
We'll see you.
Enjoy your weekend.
So that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this episode, the Journal of Interdisciplinary Conflict Science. The JCIS is an open journal for upcoming scholars. The JCIS is currently accepting article submissions on an ongoing basis. The JCIS is a publication of Nova Works, a scholarly depository at Nova Southeastern University. A link to the journal is in our description. We'd also like to thank our podcast partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, who is our editing partner, and Podkite, who does all of our analytics. We'd also like to thank iHeartRadio, where people get their music and podcasts, Apple iTunes, the largest source for music and podcasts on the internet, Spotify, the most popular source for the Nova Society. The Nova Society is available on all these and other quality platforms mentioned in our description. We'd also like to thank our listeners. Without you, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a comment, a question, or would like to be a guest on the Nova Society, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. Always remember, the power of society is knowledge. So for Dr. Scott Gershwer, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, and all of us here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Be well, and we hope to see you again next time.